You're back. I'm happy to see you. Welcome to the Ike Pickett Show. I'm Ike Pickett. Today I have a commentary on the course of finance and an introduction to Bitcoin from my point of view. There'll also be a new song I wrote for you, so let's go. In 2020, it looked like this. Because of the unscrupulous business practices of a few huge central banks and corporations that are both owned and controlled by an elite few, the economies of the world and of the United States were now on the brink of collapse. The worldwide Ponzi scheme was hitting the inevitable wall. Inflation loomed as a threat to the paychecks of all workers and the modest to moderate incomes of small businesses. In 2019, interest rates set by the Federal Reserve were already close to zero, and the United States national debt had grown to more than $30 trillion and was still growing at a rapid rate. Taxes alone could not keep up with the interest on the debt and the other runaway spending by government. Having driven the Ponzi scheme to inevitable collapse, the only tool left for the government and the Federal Reserve Central Bank was to print more money or to raise interest rates. Printing more money by the Federal Reserve creates inflation, makes the prices go higher on commodities, and it makes trading partners like Europe, China, Russia, and others angry and devalues the dollar for all American citizens. Prices were set to rise rapidly. They had to. There was no other choice. Then in 2022, the propaganda was that the dollar was stronger than ever. That was true when the value of the dollar was measured to other countries' currencies. The United States had to preserve the recognition of the dollar as the world currency, as had been agreed in the Conference of Bretton Woods in 1944 by the post-World War II world leaders. In an attempt to keep the confidence of the governed in 2022, the Keynesians resorted to propaganda because the dollar was rapidly losing its status as the world's reserve currency. Other countries began abandoning the dollar in a domino effect. Many investors were gravitating to the dollar because it looked safer than other currencies. But dollar liquidity increased, and some investors sold their stocks in favor of government bonds or gold. But the inflation rate was eating their investments faster than earnings on bonds could replace them. Japan, China, and others began liquidating U.S. bonds at a rapid rate. Saudi Arabia was threatening to abandon the petrodollar, claiming that the United States had abandoned their agreement. The dollar, as a reserve currency, was now in dire jeopardy. After a last desperate rally, this trend would end soon with a crash that would be heard and painfully felt around the world. Yet to come, but closer by the day. It is hard to make a stand when a person's welfare depends on compliance with a system that can take everything he has. Creating poverty and keeping people poor has its advantages for the rich and powerful. A weak people poses no threat. That is, until the proverbial mouse is backed into a corner and is finally left with no other choice, then he'll probably bite somebody. Fascism is best illustrated by central banks, oligarchs, and corporations of the modern day flexing their control muscles and rattling their sabers to control by fear the behavior of every individual in the world by controlling their money, using enforcement and violence when necessary to do so. Fascism is a way of organizing society with an emphasis on autocratic government, dictatorial leadership, and the suppression of opposition from the citizens. The most famous banker in history, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, boldly stated this in the 1700s. He said, "Give me control of the nation's money, and I care not who makes their laws." By combining the power of corporations with government in a fascist cause, could develop the power to control the movements of every individual in the world. Financial control of individuals could be implemented by central banks by using the internet to establish a new system called Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, which has the characteristics and the potential to enslave everyone. In a worldwide financial crisis was looming of late, more than a decade before, in 2008. After watching the financial meltdown of Wall Street and the subsequent bailout by the Federal Reserve, choosing to remain unattached, a fictitious person or persons calling themselves Satoshi Nakamoto discovered and refined a decentralized system of managing wealth that they called Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an independent method of managing currency without using the traditional system controlled by governments and central banks, such as the International Monetary Fund or the Federal Reserve. Developed 14 years earlier, after the financial crisis of 2008, by this anonymous person or group of persons on the new frontier, provided a permanent ledger by use of the internet in the vast new territory of cyberspace. Bitcoin could be used to establish wealth and security by personal management with no interference by fascist control systems worldwide. This opened the door for common people in every country to independently control their finances by personal responsibility without entrusting that responsibility to governments or institutions. Governments and banks had lost their sovereignty by betrayal of the trust vested in them by the governed, as had become transparently evident in 2008. Average citizens around the world began taking charge of their own destinies with a new and independent financial means, with a limited supply of an inflation-proof currency called Bitcoin. The creditors of Bitcoin, the creators of Bitcoin, cleverly and affectionately called Satoshi Nakamoto, thoughtfully designed for ledger entries to be made by individuals directly to a public ledger called a blockchain. They wrote a white paper and then wisely and generously disappeared, thereby creating a system with no human hands on it. Disappearing removed central control forever. Thousands of computers worldwide, called nodes, were used to verify transactions and record them permanently on a blockchain ledger, and no human was required in the process to facilitate or verify the transactions. Bitcoin was made corruption-proof because there was no way for any greedy human to manipulate it. It was also capped forever with a limited supply of 21 million coins, making it inflation-proof. Transactions could now be made between individuals without institutional control. The blockchain kept a record of every transaction, with the entire world as witness to the transactions, without revealing the private keys that secured each individual account. Owners' names were not revealed, only the public keys. Inflation-proof, theft-proof, and manipulation-proof, Bitcoin created a peaceful revolution of all human activity without the use of violence or threats of violence by governments to enforce the rules. Bitcoin became rules without rulers. Since Bitcoin had no centralized or human control over the transactions, it has to be recognized as an asset, not a security by the regulators, such as the Securities and Exchange Commission. Like a shiny new bicycle that could not be controlled by anyone but the owner, Bitcoin could be ridden around the world lightning fast by clicking a few strokes on a cell phone by anyone with a $50 cell phone and an internet connection. Without interference, fees, or manipulations by banks, currency exchanges, and SWIFT codes, Bitcoin and the number of owners of the new asset were growing faster than the national debt. It would be a while before the new coin would be widely used for commerce and trade, but free and responsible people in virtually every country in the world had discovered a way to protect themselves from the CBDC plans of fascist governments around the world. Governments and banks were placed by Bitcoin into a precarious loss of control of their citizens and depositors' activities in any way except for enforcement of laws and to punish crimes that could no longer take place in the new world of Bitcoin. Of course, fraud could still be committed using Bitcoin dollars or currency or any denomination of currency in a manipulative way. But the only way Bitcoin could be used for money laundering or any other nefarious activity was if it was held and controlled by humans. Standing alone in the hands of individual owners, holding private keys, verified by tens of thousands of computers, Bitcoin became untouchable. Owners of Bitcoin who might be inclined to engage in criminal activities could be tracked on the public blockchain ledger, making crime enforcement easier and more convenient to track for the police. Bitcoin became a tool of protection, a weapon of escape from despotism, and a peaceful departure from criminal activities and the potential for fascist rule. History was no longer repeating itself in the financial world since the discovery of cyberspace and the internet. The revolution had begun.